Hello everyone, I am Daniel, and today I'm going to do a little bit of a tier list, and this one is about all of the weaknesses in the game, the ones that are signature weaknesses, that is. These are the cards that go into each investigator's deck that's kind of bonded and themed with their investigator itself. So, this was actually a little discussion this morning on the Playing Board Games Discord, which, if you are not a member of and want to talk with people about the game, I recommend. I'm there all the time. Obviously, Playing Board Games is a huge channel, but a really nice little community on Discord too. And yeah, this kind of thing was talked about, like, hey, what about a tier list for the investigator signatures? How tough are they in comparison to others? And it's a tough question, right? Because to me, the investigator, their signature card, and their weakness all go together, right? These things are not easily isolated. So when I go through this list, which we will start with Roland Banks here, I'm going to present to you on the screen all three of those things. The signature card at the bottom left, I'm not going to talk about, but it is there. And it's worth noting that when I talk about how strong or annoying or game breaking the weaknesses are, it really has something to do in balance with how strong the rest of the investigator is, for the most part. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about these tiers. So I have just five, a kind of a basic tier list here, where the worst one at the top is game plan ruining. This is really like you draw it and you're like, uh-oh, need to have a plan for this in your deck building, really. So it's not something that you just happens, right? You need to think about this going into the game. You can't just hope you don't draw it and then, improvise later. You really do need to have a plan. So it's also just a challenge when it pops up. A lot of weaknesses are kind of strange in that they sit there and do nothing for a while. Some of them really do something right away, and you need to have either an answer or you just have to figure out a way to tank it. Fairly upsetting is one step removed from that, so it does mean that you're going to need to do something when it shows up, I think, for the most part, or that you need to figure out some way to build this into your deck building, but it's maybe not as urgent or may not wreck your entire game as much as the top tier. Average, I suspect most of them will go here. Not every weakness is, of course, going to be the same power level as I mentioned before, but I think most of them are a little bit disruptive. As we'll talk about throughout this list, some of them are interesting because they make your investigator waste their time doing something they're bad at, and some of them are interesting because they make your investigator use up their ability. I think the ones that just make you use your ability more are going to fall in the average more often than not, because it's just, a little bit of, it takes like some rounds away from you, but isn't asking you to do something different with your deck. Speed bump is, I was almost going to say roadblock for the average one, where speed bump is just a little nudge saying, oops, maybe you better think about this. And then the bottom one, a piece of cake, is really nothing. And there's not too many, I think, that are so soft. But we'll, as we go along, also mention kind of what are the typical ways that people deal with the weaknesses. And you'll notice that for a piece of cake, it's basically nothing. You just do whatever you were doing anyway. You don't have to think about it. Player count here matters too. I think in lower player counts, these are much worse. Some of them in particular are a lot worse. In higher player counts, where other investigators can solve your problem for you, these are all going to bump down a little bit in terms of how difficult they are to deal with. All right, enough with our prologue. Let's talk about each of these in some strange order. The way these slides go in is I just throw them into a directory and then that's what comes out. But Roland is first because he is the first investigator everyone always talks about from the core set, and his weakness cover up is it gets three clues on it, and they are considered to be there. And if you don't get them off, then you suffer one mental trauma, which is really tough for Roland because he only has 5 sanity. So how do you get the clues off? When you would discover a clue, you can get one from cover up instead. Or well, you remove one from cover up. And sorry, I'm not reading these off the screen. They're in my memory here. I try to make it big enough on the screen so you could read them. Anyway, this is a reaction, so you do not have to do this. So if you are just saying, I will take the mental trauma, I don't care, you can leave the clues on cover up, and that's just a hit. Also, because it's a reaction on a treachery, anyone at your location can discover clues, and instead of discovering clues, remove them from cover up. You do need to be able to discover the clue though. So if you use something like working a hunch, there needs to be a clue on your location. So that makes this, I think, a little bit more difficult when you draw it at the end. But overall, I think this is going to be, and I'm also doing this in the context of the modern full card pool. I think this is going to go to just fairly upsetting. I don't think it ruins your game plan because it doesn't ask you to do anything with it right now. But it is a pretty tough weakness, especially for a core set investigator that tends to die to horror a lot. No mincing words on that one. Let's move on to Ashcan Pete, apparently. Okay, Racked by Nightmares just exhausts everything, including Duke, which you don't really want because you need to use Duke to do basically everything when you're Ashcan Pete. Now, where is he down in my list? The bottom of the screen here. This is Racked by... I think this is average, so it's 2 actions from anyone to just remove it. It basically takes you out for 1 turn, and if you don't remove it the turn that it comes out, again, your cards won't ready in upkeep, so that means that you're down the next turn as well. However, you can ready Duke or any other asset by discarding a card once this has left play. So you're not totally hosed the turn that it's there. You don't have to wait for upkeep for everything to ready again. I think it's an average weakness. Again, prevents you from doing what you're doing, but 2 actions is not terrible. Moving on to Min, though. Oh boy. The King in Yellow is, I think, game plan ruining. And you need to have a game plan in order to pass the test. It's cannot commit 1 or 2 cards to any test. You have to commit 3, and if you want to get rid of the King in Yellow, you need to commit 3 that have 6 matching skill icons. Yikes. Yikes. This is, again, if you are playing Min right with Dream Diary, with lots of Inquiring Mind, lots of skill cards with lots of icons, this is okay, but you need to do this. And I don't think it's necessary for Min to play, the game with single cards with lots of icons. So back in the day, people ran something like Look What I Found just because it had 2 intellect icons. The nice thing about this one is that you can use any test you want. It doesn't have to be an investigation. It can be anything you want. Let's see. King in Yellow, I think, is going to go to the top. If you are planning on committing cards, and that's just usually your game plan, you're completely shut down. It shuts down Analytical Mind. You can't commit to anyone else. I think this is just one of the rougher weaknesses. Also, it's a Seeker card. Sorry, in a Seeker deck. Min, like all Seekers, is prone to drawing lots of cards, so this tends to come out earlier than you might expect. It is tome traded, meaning that it might come out through something like Wit and Green or some other effect that searches for tomes. And you're likely to reshuffle your deck and draw it again. That's ultimately what makes us even tougher, I think. It's a good one, but I think it's one of the tougher ones. You really do have to think about what you're doing with your deck before playing Min. I'm going to put Safina's up here too. Safina's the Star of Hyades. Safina gets these 5 events underneath her that you get to double with, essentially double with Painted World. I guess it could be more than double, but the Star of Hyades, when it comes out, you need to pick one of those and you remove it from the game. And this is your whole ability, basically, is that you are using these extra copies of cards more than once, and once you've lost those, and it's a random one, so it might be one that you really wanted to use, your game plan kind of goes, I don't want to say out the window, because there are other things you can do, but this is one of the reasons I don't like Safina much. I find this to be a tough weakness because when you run out of all of those, oh, by the way, it shuffles back into your deck, so it will eventually get rid of all of those cards. You can take the cards out from underneath Safina and use them, but now when you draw the stars again, you will take a damage and a horror, and she's got 5/9. The horror is not a big deal. The damage definitely is. So I think this one is really rough. Now, I know a lot of people do things like run cards. We're going to put you all the way at the top here, like Scroll of Secrets or parallel fates or friends in low places to try to discard this weakness, because there's no way this discards unless it's the last card. What is it? If there are 5 or more cards left in your deck? Yeah, okay. So if there are not 5 or more cards left in your deck, then it'll discard. But that is, then it's already wreaked havoc probably if you've gotten that far. So some people run these other cards to try to discard it manually. But here's the thing. If a card, a weakness, is forcing you to put cards into your deck that you probably wouldn't otherwise stuff into it. I mean, those aren't bad cards, but you probably wouldn't run them normally in Safina if not for her weakness. So if you're doing that, I think the weakness has to go up in this top tier. It's not to say that you can't ignore it, right? You can get around it like you can with all these weaknesses. It's just that something like Ashcan Pete's weakness, you just spend the 2 actions and you're happy to do that. And then it's gone for a while. Moving on to Akachi. I just played Akachi recently, and hers is an interesting one where you basically are using up your ability of getting an extra charge on assets that have charges. You're taking those charges away and putting them on Angered Spirits. You have until the end of the scenario, so it is true that it's not pressing. One thing I learned when I played was that it has to be from spell assets, not any asset with charges. So it is a little tougher to do this if you start getting rid of your shrivelings and whatnot. And if you don't do all this, you just need 4 of them, then you get a physical trauma, which is not the worst. I mean, it can be a problem since you only start with 6, but it's not quite as bad as Roland and his cover-up, because taking damage, while it can happen for Akachi, is not as likely as Roland taking horror. So I'm going to go with, actually, I'm going to put it under speed bump. I never did take the physical trauma. It is, again, one of these that eats up your abilities. So it is kind of weird. And you can play cards like Alchemical Transmutation just to feed your weakness. I'm not a huge fan of doing that. I don't think you need to. Other people can help you if they happen to have spell assets. But again, it's not pressing, and it is not something that you are going to be too worried about, even if you happen to fail. You exhaust the spell assets, so you actually can get all of this done in 1 turn, unlike a few of the other weaknesses that force you to take several turns to clear them out. I guess we're doing all the Carcosa ones first. Yorick. He's got Graveyard Ghouls. Well, Yorick likes defeating enemies. It's the only way he can trigger his ability. Graveyard Ghouls says you cannot return cards from your discard pile while you are engaged with them. However, you're not engaged with them when, or after, you defeat an enemy, namely the Graveyard Ghouls. So you can still use this to get a card, an asset, out of your discard pile. You can't, I suppose, use your Elder Sign. If this test is successful, return 1 card. Maybe you can. If you defeated the Graveyard Ghouls on the turn that you pull the action that you pull the Elder Sign, I think you can pull something out. But this just seems all upside. Why is this a weakness? I'm going to put this under a piece of cake. Now, I mean, 3/3/3 is not nothing. And basically what they do is they demand that you kill them before you kill something else, but I don't see how that's a problem for Yorick. You just do it. And hey, you can use your bury them deep on them as well, but that's not likely to happen. Lola is a little special. She's got a taboo version that changes her Crisis of Identity, which she has 2 of, by the way, so that you discard only 1 card of your roll, which is fine. Now, I've never played Lola. I'm a wimp, I suppose. The original one was bad. This one I think is okay, because you can usually hold on to 1 card or have 1 card in play that you can discard, and you just say, all right. But the fact that there are 2 of them is tough. I actually don't know where to rate this. I think I'm going to put it under average. I think that seems okay. Losing cards is annoying. I'm going to put it in average just because there are 2 cards, and I'm going to respect a card that I've not played. Leo Anderson. So Leo likes having allies. Bought in Blood says that you must discard 1 ally in play or all of them in your hand. I hope that's what it says. Hold on. Yeah, again, I can't read these. Um, so you always want to not have a bunch of allies in your hand. You want to play them, which is what Leo wants to do anyway. And you don't want to leave a really good ally in play without any in your hand. Honestly, like losing one card from your hand is not a big deal. It's a lot weaker than Tommy's weakness, which is a sort of a similar effect. So I think this is going to just go under a speed bump. Annoying if you're playing Sled Dog Leo because you might be holding them in your hand or you don't want to lose that extra one in play. But honestly, that's a little bit of a meme deck anyway, so I don't think I care too much in terms of my rating. You can't always rate based on the extremes of like the best or worst possible scenarios, but the typical ones, right? What is sort of the typical, not average necessarily, but the median? All right, Leo, where is your weakness down here? Bot and blood is uh these all showed up in a random order too, and it's hard for me to read them. Here we go. Yeah, this is gonna be a speed bump. Now, it is true that every weakness is pretty bad if it comes out at the wrong time, but I think that not all of them are going to be that bad for investigators, even at the wrong time. Ursula Downs. Hers is you put it, the Call of the Unknown into play, and then you must, at the beginning of your turn, choose a location that you must then go investigate. Can't be your location, so you're basically having to move and pass and investigate. Thankfully, you do have an extra action to move, well, to investigate after you move, but if you fail to do this, you take 2 horror, shuffle it back in. I think all of the shuffle back into the deck weaknesses are bad. In Seeker, I think even worse because you're likely to draw them multiple times. And the 2 horror isn't nothing. This is one of the few Seekers that only has 7 or fewer sanities. So Ursula needs a little bit more horror soak because you don't want to go out of your way every time just to investigate a location with, say, no clues. But for the most part, you can, you know, if you draw this and there's still clues out there, you can just move around and keep fulfilling your weaknesses needs. So I'm going to go with average here. It's something that can be bad if you draw it later, but at the beginning of the scenario, you can kind of ignore it. You can just do, well, not ignore it isn't take the horror. I mean, ignore it, the bad part. You just still continue your game plan. Father Mateo has some snakes, serpents of Yig. These guys take the elder sign out of the chaos bag. If it's not there, like it's sealed on a card, then they don't do much. But they're 2/3/2, and Father Mateo is not the best fighter, but he can take Spectral Razor, which just solves the problem entirely. I mean, that puts him at 6, I think. Yeah, 4 + 2 is 6. And if you pass the test, they're gone, and that's the end of it. So I think this is basically a speed bump. Someone else can kill them too. The weakness enemies tend to be a bit easier, especially when they're paired with someone who doesn't usually fight. Yes, Father Mateo wants the Elder Sign, but also, you don't need it on every test, so just let them take it for a turn. Calvin Wright. Voice of the Messenger is really interesting, right? This one deals you a direct damage or horror, and whichever one you take the corresponding trauma, which you want. You're Calvin, you want all the trauma you can take. That way, the next scenario you start with some extra damage and horror, which boosts your stats. Really nice. You want to draw this almost every scenario. You just don't want to draw it more than that. So he's 6/6. In an 8 scenario campaign, you can afford to take 5 trauma on one end and 5 trauma on the other. So yeah, you can afford to take a bunch of trauma, but there's going to be trauma that the campaigns give out anyway. usually. And if you get defeated, which can be something that happens with Calvin, you don't want to have this extra trauma sneaking up on you. So, again, you're okay drawing this, maybe 5 to 6 times per campaign. You just don't want to do it much more than that. I remember playing this in Circle and Done, and Secret Name, which tends to mill your deck a lot and draw your weakness extra times, was very scary. Sometimes, though, you don't draw it at all because survivors don't have the best card draw. And then you say, okay, what a weird one. I'm going to put this under speed bump because you actually legitimately want to see it. It helps you even in the scenario that you're playing, provided that you're not already sitting on 5 health or 5 sanity, or both. Daisy. Hey, we're back to core set. Now, the Necronomicon, Daisy's Necronomicon, is very interesting. So it goes into your threat area and takes up a hand slot. Threat area is sort of weird here because other people cannot take the action on it. It is a player card. Only you can do it. And what you do is you move one of the 3 horror that's sitting there onto Daisy. It takes up one of your tome actions if you want to do it, but a lot of people just let it sit there because while it does take up a hand slot, the only other thing it does is turns your Elder Signs into auto fails. It's not that bad, right? How often do you draw Elder Signs? So a lot of people say, instead of wasting my extra tome ability and taking extra horror, and it has to be basically direct, why not just ignore this thing? Play her tote back and get extra hand slots for tomes anyway. So, sometimes you don't want to leave it out because you really feel like the Elder Signs are going to catch up with you because you're really sad not to use her actual Elder Sign. But I'm going to say this is just a speed bump. A lot of people just do not clear this one at all. And I see why. Carolyn Fern. I played quite a bit of Carolyn. This one turns off her ability entirely. So unlike Daisy's, you can't just ignore it. And you're not able to heal any horror off of any other cards other than Rational Thought. Once you do get the 4th horror off of Rational Thought, and you just use any ability that normally would heal horror from your investigator, you do get the resource, I believe, because this is gone by the time that you're using that after reaction on Carolyn's card. But this is actually kind of annoying. I don't think it's the worst thing to clear out, but it does force you to make sure you can heal more than 1 horror at a time. Otherwise, this is spending like 4 actions. Or I suppose if you have ways of healing horror that don't spend actions, then that's okay too. I'm going to put this in average. It might be a little bit higher than that, honestly, just because if you... Carolyn's ability really wants you to heal kind of horror 1 at a time and do it not necessarily from her investigator card. So you have to figure out other ways to mitigate this. But it's not like you're not doing this sort of thing anyway. So I don't think it's quite so bad, but I'm going to put it under average. It may end up being that average is actually higher than average as we go through. There's so many that don't seem that bad, at least that we've seen so far. Joe Diamond is special because his weakness isn't in his deck. It's in his hunch deck, which is a separate set of 11 cards. This unsolved case plus 10 other insights. It costs 4, but it really costs 2 because the only way to play this thing, and you probably should, is to get the 2 resource discount by playing it off the top of your hunch deck. If it's still there at the end of your investigator phase, you just move it off anyway, but then you get 2 fewer experience from the scenario. It also has a funny bit where part of the playing of this card is to drop a clue on the location with the highest shroud. But if you have no clues, such as you dropped your clues on the location you're already on, or you have just spent all your clues, this does nothing. You can still play it though. It still counts as changing the game state. But it doesn't do anything. You just need an action and 2 resources and you're good to go. I've played Joe quite a bit and I've never been stuck with this one. I know that there are people who play Geared Up Joe and then they draw this on their first turn. And then they say, well, I have two fewer experience for this particular scenario. And then there's Dissonant Voices, which is a bad combo where you just get stuck. However, I like to throw Farsight into my Joe Diamond decks because then you always have, well, pretty much always have an extra action. And you can use it for events. Probably you'll have 8 or more cards in hand if you have this that card in your deck anyway. So good way to just dump this. It is definitely possible to have a turn where you just don't have time to play this, but for an attack of opportunity, probably you'll get rid of this for the 2 XP. I think this one is a piece of cake, honestly. I don't think it's a big deal. Preston Fairmont, Lodge Debts. This is very similar. You remove this from the game by playing it, and it costs you 10 resources. You can leave this in your hand for the whole game, as long as you pay it off at some point. And yeah, maybe you're being a little bold by waiting until like the last possible moment or waiting for you to, not need the resources and you might die. But we're saying, as a point of rules order here, any of these weaknesses that say something like when the game ends, if this is still in play, when you get defeated counts as the game ending. So just so you know. The lodge debts are pretty easy. You get money pretty quickly in Preston, and you are not asked to do this as quickly as even Joe's weakness. So I'll put that one down there as well. Marie. Marie has an asset. It's not an ally, but takes up the ally slot. So goodbye, whoever was there. And you need to put Doom on Mr. Baron Samedi in order to get rid of him. So on the one hand, you get to use your ability because Marie likes to have Doom on cards that she controls, which is kind of neat. You can kind of choose when to do that, but this force effect hits everyone. So when any investigator takes damage, right, you get extra damage. I think that's what it does. Check real quick. Yeah, any amount of damage placed on an investigator at his location, 1 additional damage on that investigator. Actually, not even that bad. You could put damage on your soak, and then this doesn't do anything. So yeah, I mean, he's a little troubling, but the truth is that, well, okay, he needs 3 Doom on him, so you do need to figure out an agenda in which you can make this work. And in the meantime, you have the problem. Okay. I'm gonna be a little bit more, well, I'm gonna be a little bit more realistic about this one. I think this one maybe goes into fairly upsetting. I don't think it's not the worst, so it's not going in the top tier, but it can stick around longer than you want. Although there is a potential positive. I don't know. I'm gonna put it into fairly upsetting for now. I kind of want to take it down to average, but I know it can be bad. Rita, though, I just played a whole campaign of Rita. I like Rita. I have a good time. But the hoods are a nightmare. Okay, so they have alert, and they have, after you evade, and this is forced, the hoods, they attack you. So most of what Rita wants to do in terms of damage has to do with evading first. This tells you find a different way, or you're going to tank some damage and horror. She's 9/5. It's not the worst idea or thing that she can do. But man, it feels really bad to try to evade them thinking that you're just going to take the 1/1 and that's the end of it. And then you fail the test because of the auto fail, and now suddenly you're taking 2 and 2 because you're going to try to evade them again. Or you were trying to do it in your investigator turn, you fail the evade, and now they attack you anyway. Now you're down like 3/3, and that is very bad. I just think that compared to York, right, they are making you find a different solution for how you normally do your job. So maybe that solution is tell someone else to fight the hoods for you. It's a very good solution. However, I'm going to put this under fairly upsetting. I'm not sure it's game plan ruining because if you do just pass the evade and take the 1-on-1, you can use something like Dirty Fighting and just kill them pretty easily. Sweeping Kick, also, you do get hit back first. The forced effect is always going to happen before your reaction ability, so they did think of that. But I think there are a few ways that you could get rid of them without getting attacked. If you have brute force, if you can manage to get high enough, I think you can do it, but it is not easy. If you're in a 3 or 4 player group, I think you just ask someone else to deal with it. Alert man. Okay, here's Tommy. So Tommy's is you discard each asset, not one, each asset that you control that has at least 1 damage or horror on it. So the tokens have to be on it. If you don't have any such things in play, this goes back into your deck. Tommy already has a problem with card draw. So on the one hand, I guess you're less likely to draw it again because you're constantly refilling your deck with different assets that you defeated. On the other hand, it's just getting in the way, like everything else is, of getting to the cards that you're really looking for. So very tough to try to get rid of this. So how do you get rid of it? Generally what people do is they like get scared and they don't use Tommy's ability unless they can defeat the asset in one go. And then they'll put like a cherished keepsake or something out with 1 horror on it and basically bait the weakness out. They're hoping that you draw the weakness, you discard the asset, and now it's gone. You're like, okay, fine. We did it. We don't worry about this again. Now you can go off and actually use your ability. It's really tough, man. Like you want to play something like Agency Backup, but then you're really scared to use the ability. So what do? You just are a little bit sad. I don't know if this goes to the top. I don't think so. I think this is just under fairly upsetting. I'm fairly upset by it. All right, where are you? Rookie Mistake. I mean, it also is a really great name because usually when it happens and you accidentally put like, a bunch of horror damage on something, but it didn't actually get defeated, and then you immediately draw the Rookie Mistake and you discard, whatever it is, your B Cop or something. That's what everyone says. You made a rookie mistake. Okay. Shocking Discovery is Mandy Thompson's weakness, and this one's weird because you just kind of draw it when you're doing your research stuff, and then it's done. So what typically people do is so this pops up in a search effect, you have to draw the top card of the encounter deck, and that's basically it. So what, right? If you draw it any other way, it just goes back into your deck, which is annoying. So the worst part about it is that it cancels the effect of the search. That's not so bad if you just try to do this on a search that you don't care about. People play a research librarian, maybe not even caring about looking for that particular tome because it searches the whole deck. And since this inevitably will be in your deck, you just cancel the search, meaning you don't get the book. Oh no. And that's it. You draw the top card of the encounter card. That's not that bad, right? It's just an extra encounter card. Could be a little annoying, but then you just don't have a weakness again. However, Mandy does, especially with 30 or 40 cards, cycle through her deck. At 50, maybe not as much. So you could see this multiple times. I don't think it's nothing. It's just one that's kind of easy to game. And the weaknesses shouldn't be that easy to game. I'm going to put it under speed bump. It is, you do have to be aware of it, right? But it's not such that I said before, like you better run something crazy just to avoid the weakness. Even if you don't do the research librarian trick, you pull it out under like a Eureka or something, and you're like, well, okay, I lost 1 card draw. Weaknesses, after all, all the other ones anyway, usually pop up from, upkeep or somewhere else where you drew a card. And instead of drawing a card you want, you draw something that demands its attention. For Shocking Discovery, yeah, I suppose it's eating a draw, but it's kind of under your own power. Okay. Luke Robinson. This makes you go to your dream gate and it goes to the bad dream gate, where you need to investigate a 6 shroud location, I believe. And if you don't, you just take 2 horror. It's annoying because it sort of turns off your usefulness to the team that particular turn. It'll happen, but 2 horror in Mystic is not a thing. It's just something that happens. I'm going to put that under a speed bump. Gosh, why are these so easy? Patrice. This is another one that's not so pressing until it kind of is. So she's got a hidden weakness into her hand, and it's such a good addition to the Patrice gameplay loop because you have 5 cards and you discard them all and you get a new 5 cards at the end of every round. However, you don't discard weaknesses, and this includes hidden cards as well. And you're stuck with this, and instead of drawing 5 cards, you're drawing 4. And remember how I said that drawing a weakness is eating 1 card drop? Well, this is 1 card every single turn until you can find a solution, which is to pass a 5 fight or 5 evade check. And you need to do it before your deck runs out, which will happen. And if it does, you take 3 damage, which is really bad. So this one you do plan around. I mean, it's a very strong part of her identity. I don't think I want to underestimate this one. I'm going to put this under fairly upsetting. You do need to, I mean, if you fail the test, it spawns with you, and you still need to deal with it, or maybe someone else can help, but it's not an easy thing to get rid of, even once it spawns. I'm going to put it under fairly upsetting. But you're always going to see it. So that's kind of the difference between some of these where you can just be like, fingers crossed, I will not draw this weakness this game. For Patrice, you will. So that's the only difference between this one and maybe some of the others where you can hopefully not have to deal with it every single time. But it does sort of screw with Patrice more than I think some of these other ones do, which I think is fine. Sister Mary. I'm playing Sister Mary right now. And her Crisis of Faith is worth a discussion because of the card called Deny Existence. Now, for some time, people's understanding of Deny Existence was that it could deny any chunk of horror that came in at once. And cards like Crisis of Faith that say for each Bless token in the Chaos bag, you must either replace it or replace it with a Curse token or take 1 horror. People understood this to be like a choice based on looking at how many Bless tokens were in the bag. So if there are 5 Bless tokens in the bag, you could say, I'm taking 2 horror and putting 3 curses in, taking out the 3 Bless. However, they have now told us that that's not how it works. It is check each Bless token and make a decision for each of those Bless tokens. So it's take 1 horror, take 1 horror, take 1 horror, take 1 horror, put a curse in, put a curse in. Those are all individual instances. Deny Existence only ignores 1. To be fair, what people did was they held on to Deny Existence, had 9 or 10 curse tokens or Bless tokens in the bag, and then just played this and said, nope, I don't have a weakness. My weakness said, keep 1 card in my hand the whole game. And that's kind of lame. However, I'm now playing Sister Mary, and this is not easy. You really do want the Bless tokens to be out there somewhere. She basically is kind of forced to play the Seal archetype instead of leaving them in the bag all the time, which is not always easy to do. Or you soak or tank the horror. She has 9 sanity, so it's not impossible to do this, but if there's other sources of horror in the game, it's not easy. That said, I think I'm going to put it under Maybe it's fairly upsetting. Maybe it is. If you don't draw it, it's totally fine. But if you draw it early, it's not a big deal. But once you start going further and further into the scenario, you start checking the number of blessed tokens in the bag, and you're like, hmm, when I draw my Crisis of Faith, what do I do? That's a good weakness. I think that is true for basically all of these here at the top. Skids. Well, you know that I'm playing Skids on the channel. Skids has a funny weakness, hospital debts, where you need to put, like Joe Diamond, you need to do something before the end of the game. And this something is spend 6 resources. Basically, you put in chunks of 2, hopefully, most 2, you need to put these resources onto hospital debts, and by the end, if you don't have 6 or more, then you do not get, you lose 2 XP. Other people can help. You can do this since it's limit twice per round. There is no limit per investigator. Everyone can do it in 1 round. If you have 3 investigators in the game, everyone in the last round puts 2 resources there, you're done. Doesn't say max once per round. If it did, then it would be for everyone, or a group limit or something, once per round. In solo, which I'm doing, it's a little rough because this is basically 3 actions of your own ability that you're giving away. I think there's way more ways to get resources nowadays that this is actually pretty easy regardless. But you're sort of annoyed by it. But it's a weakness. Like, what do you expect? His card in general is pretty, I'm not going to say weak, but it's not great compared to the abilities of other investigators. So I think that it's fine that this card is pretty easy to clear. Like I said, you play this in multiplayer and it just gets cleared. There's no way that people don't have a couple of extra resources. You can be greedy and make everyone else do it, but probably don't do that. Next up is Amanda Sharp. Oh boy. I don't know what they're thinking here. All right, so Amanda has this whole thing where there's a card underneath her, and that card is put there at the beginning of the investigator phase. You draw a card, put the card underneath Amanda, you get plus skill value for the matching icons underneath it. Well, you commit the card for all the tests while it's there. Whispers from the Deep is her weakness, and it subtracts instead of adds. So it's got a wild symbol, but it actually is a -1. And if this is in your hand, at that moment when you must choose to put a card underneath her, this has to be the one if it's in your hand. Most of the time, it is not. The only reason that it would be there is if you drew the card during upkeep or you drew the card on that ability. Amanda draws a lot of cards during her turn, so there's a good chance that you do draw it during the middle of your turn, and you can just toss it at any test. If it is underneath your card, like, that's kind of bad. You're at 1s instead of 2s, but your signature card actually just solves the problem for you. Don't forget, you also can toss this at any other investigator. In other words, if you drew this, say, last action of your turn or something like that, you can just throw it at someone else's test. They'll get -1 still, but then it's gone. It's true that Amanda draws a lot of cards, and we'll see this probably more than once per deck more than once per scenario. So because she cycles her deck often, but it's her other weakness, whatever is the non-signature one, that is troubling. This one is basically nothing. I don't know why. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that it's so soft. Trish also has a pretty easy one. It does do 2 damage to her, the shadow agents, but you're not supposed to actually kill them. You're supposed to discard them by evading them. 5 evade, you say? That's kind of tough. Well, you know what you can do? You can investigate and discover clues. If you do that, then they go away because you use your ability. If you've already used your ability up that round, I guess it's kind of unlucky. The other reason why this is such a piece of cake is because often you're going to be running something like uh, Lucky Cigarette Case, Perception, cards that will let you draw as part of investigation, but before you discover the clue. Well, you don't, I mean, you get to order what happens in terms of perception, but for something like Lucky Cigarette Case, you draw the card before you actually discover the clue. So shadow agents might not even be in play, and you just might draw them. If you're running Lucky Cigarette Case level 3, or something like Friends in Low Places, where you know where the card is, this is just nothing. You just automatically evade them with your ability. Even if they do come into play, you can get rid of them. Play cards like Obfuscation or something else that lets you not take an attack of opportunity, and then they'll just go away, breaking entering. So, Strong Investigator has no problems. Where are you, Shadow Agents? Here you are. Another piece of cake. I'm sad to say it. Dexter Drake. This is not easy. This one is the occult scraps, so they can't be played. So you need to use up your ability to fast something into play. If you don't do that, then it's stuck in your hand and you have -2 willpower. Not ideal. But you're not done once you get into play. Once you get it into play, it is -1 willpower. So you need to use your ability yet again and put something else in. I mean, it's not bad because like you use it to put something else in for that second time, but you're going to be stuck with it probably for like a round and a half, maybe 2 rounds. So it puts a damper on both your ability and your stats. Let's put it in average, I think. Mob Goons. So Daniela has the Mob Goons. They are a 3/3/3 like some of the other enemies we've seen, and you can't cancel their attacks, but that's okay. You can still use your ability on them, so you can deal 1 damage back when they attack you, but when they do attack you, it is direct damage and direct horror. It doesn't really phase me. Yeah, they can show up at an inopportune time, but you can do... So you can't cancel their attacks, but you can cancel their damage, right? So you can use something like Flesh Ward to cancel the damage or horror, and still you're okay. But you're built to fight things. You're built to tank and to soak. For all the other damage, you just reserve a little bit of direct damage for the Mob Goons. I don't think it's as easy as York, which I feel like is absolutely nothing. So let's put it under speed bump. I can now start to put these over here in the front. Norman. Norman has the ability to play cards off the top of his deck. The Harbinger says no. And you cannot draw cards. You cannot do anything off the top of your deck. You can't shuffle anything into your deck. Which is sort of funny. There's like a bunch of weird interactions you can do with this card on top of your deck. But it's just 2 actions to get rid of. And you kind of want to do it, right? Your ability, unless you get to the end of the scenario where you're like, we're set up, we're good, I don't need any more cards. Which sounds strange, but it does happen. I think this is just going to go under average. Monterey Jack. This is a treachery that forces you to be able to, and you have to investigate. It's a basic action on the treachery, and you got to pass it. Maybe forces you to be able to play things like Magnifying Glass, or have some skill cards to commit, because you don't know what the shroud of that location is going to be. If you can't actually investigate it, like there's a locked door there, then you are able to move, but then you are stuck with the buried secrets there instead. I think that's okay. I think that's a perfectly normal weakness. I think this is average. It can be scary. I've seen it get stuck at a 6 shroud location, but just as easily could be just a 1 action tax. By the way, it also has this ability of taking some horror if you truly are stuck. So that's actually quite nice. Maybe this is just a speed bump. I think it is. I don't think it's that bad. You should be able to play around this pretty easily. It's just asking you to do something more of what you're always doing, investigating. The only part that's a negative is if you're used to using lockpicks or Thieves' Kit or something, then you can't do that. Basic investigate. Lily Chen. Okay, this one's interesting because there's 4 of them, but that depends on how many of the disciplines you have. So you have 1 per discipline. So either you take a damage in a horror or you flip a discipline over. I think that's the definition of average. You're not happy to see it, but the first one is definitely okay. You should be able to make a choice there, right? Um, honestly, yeah, that's where that one's going to land. Bob, this one gives you 1 horror always, and then based on how much money you have, you might take more. Full disclosure, I have died, like died. Investigator killed because I forgot this card was in my deck. I think I went down to no resources, and because you draw cards before you get resources during upkeep, I think I took the max horror, and I was done for. Oops. That should not happen to you. That was just a mistake. It forces Bob to play big money, which is annoying, I think, because he could play like Dark Horse or other sorts of things. The high end is scary. And even if you, so 10 or fewer, you take 1 additional. I think it's okay. I think this is average as well. I just feel like all the other ones down here are not pressing or don't really care at the moment that you draw them. Okay, where are you, Bob? Empty. Yeah, right here. Okay. Average seems fine to me. Charlie King. For each ally, you have to either exhaust them or deal them 1 damage and 1 horror. You don't really want to do that. Exhausting them is likely what you want to do. You get to, if you have Bonnie out, you can then ready someone else, a different ally that you've already exhausted. This can kill some allies if you're not careful. But ultimately, no, I think this is average. You don't, I mean, it does something, right? I think it kind of fits under the Ashcan Pete model of it doesn't waste your actions, but it's going to force you to take an off turn. Amanda's, for example, has the promise of you taking an off turn, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen very often. It does happen, but not very often. Carson Sinclair. This one has another shuffle back into your deck thing at the end of your turn, so Carson's turn. If you did not commit any cards to skill tests to other investigators, so typically what happens is that you give an action away, they take a skill test, you need to commit on your turn to them. If you don't do that, then you get a horror shuffles back. And this is a weak dude. He only has 6 sanity, so it's not easy. So technically, what people do is they just run a skill-based build. Again, is that game plan ruining when this shows up? No. Because 1 horror and it goes away, you're already probably tanking things. It's okay. It's okay to see this go back into your deck. You might see it more than once, though. Let's go with average. Agnes, we are back to the core set. Agnes says, please spend an action, 2 resources to put a doom on the agenda. This is an Ancient Evils in your deck. You can hang on to it if you'd like. And you might use it to deal damage to enemies at your location because you'll be taking some horror. It's a little bit risky. It is sort of a tough situation when you're like, okay, I have Peter out. I can do this for a certain amount of time, but I will die if I don't play this. So good weakness. This is I'm not sure I'm going to go as far as game plan ruining. I'm going to put it up at fairly upsetting, though. I think Agnes is a strong enough investigator that things balance out, but they kind of need to. Kaimani, here's an enemy that you can use your ability on, but it's difficult. You still probably should. Alert is not easy. I'm going to put this under a speed bump. Someone else can just kill him also. Yeah. Daryl. So remove evidence or take a bunch of horror. So it sounds a lot like greed. You should have evidence. So you don't want to like hoard the evidence and say, well, what if my weakness comes out? I don't think you want to do that. I think you still want to use your ability during the whole game. And you have 8 and you can tank. What's interesting about this one compared to Sister Mary's is you are forced to lose the evidence. You cannot choose to take the horror. How bad is that? How bad is it to lose the evidence? I don't know. I'm going to put this under average. Tommy. Well, Nathaniel Show, Tommy Malloy. This is an enemy, and I've said that the enemies are pretty easy. However, this one is a 3 action tax. 2 damage if you let him live that long, but it's kind of tough to get rid of him because every time you deal damage, it's going to reduce the damage to 1. There are some ways to get rid of him. People I've seen will run handcuffs because then you never have to deal with them again. I don't think that's going to make it a piece of cake. Oh, it's just you just sort of game the system a bit more than you probably should. But neither does that make it any more than I think average. This is a 3 action weakness in an investigator who, I mean, you don't use your ability on him. The 2 damage is okay if you can't manage to kill him in 1 turn because you're killing something else. I think it's average. It's bad, but I don't think it wrecks you. Harvey Walters, man, they didn't pull any punches with the investigator starter deck weaknesses, did they? This one, Thrice Damned Curiosity, says for every 3 cards in your hand, so not this, all the other cards, you take 1 damage. Dude's pretty tanky. He's got 7 health and 8 sanity. It's okay. There's a lot to be said about this one. Earlier in the game's lifespan, people said, put Versatile in for Deny Existence. Because people are upset about the idea that the weakness says, don't do the big hand thing that Harvey basically promises to do with his deck. Like I said before, most of these are waste your ability or make you afraid of using your ability. But I think with the Seeker card pool, you shouldn't be so afraid. You should be expecting to take 3 damage, maybe 4, from this on every deck cycle. But you can do it. You can play Bizarre Diagnosis, drop a clue, heal 3. You can play Surgical Kit, 2 actions to heal 3, but also draw like 2 cards and heal horror, really quite good. And you just need like 1 copy of both of those, right? People did Bulletproof Vest back in the day. That's also fine. I don't think you should be scared of this one. You don't just draw 12 cards when you have only a few, points of health left. Just don't do that. But it doesn't mean don't play the big hand style. It just doesn't. You could ignore this and just try to play like what people call like the accordion style, where they draw a lot of cards and then play them all. And then draw a lot of cards and play them all. So hopefully when you do draw this, you don't actually have that many cards in your hand. Up to you. You have to be aware of it. So I'm going to put it under average for that reason, that it's not something you don't care about when it shows up. Winifred is next, and she's got some arrogance. You must commit it to each skill that you perform. You need to find a test that you will fail. Arrogance will help you fail it because it's -1. The wildlife kindness -1. But you basically just need to find something that you'll fail. Often it's going to be a willpower test that you can toss at it and then it's okay. The problem is when you're in a situation where you're like, well, I need to pass this test. I drew an enemy. I didn't draw a treachery. And you are stuck committing it over and over again until you fail. It's actually quite a good design. I don't think it's that tough though. We're going to put it into speed bump because once it's gone, well, you'll see it next deck cycle, but you don't have to worry about it. -1 to maybe 1 or 2 tests before you find that failing test is okay. Just commit. Jacqueline. Dark Future basically lets you, well, removes your ability. You can't cancel a bunch of tokens anymore, and that means you're probably not going to use your ability unless you're really desperate, because revealing extra tokens and having to use them all is bad. However, you get rid of it for free. You save your ability for the end of your turn. You reveal like 7 tokens or whatever it is, and hopefully one of those is the Elder Sign. It's interesting in Jacqueline though, because if you're playing a Bless Curse team, you can't play Jacqueline. It makes it really tough to get rid of her weakness because you don't draw another token after the Bless or Curse. So the 7 tokens that you draw, yeah, that's just much tougher. I think the speed bump. I don't think it's a piece of cake, but it's kind of at the bottom of this list, I would say. The reason, again, that it just doesn't take an action. You're just sort of waiting and biding your time until it goes away. Stella. Called by the Mists. After you initiate a skill test with a difficulty of 4 or higher, take a damage. So Stella wants to take some difficult tests in the Mythos phase or the beginning of her turn when she's playing Quick Learner. It's easy to forget about this one. I don't think it's that bad. You just find the 2 actions and get rid of it, I suppose. Look at how much damage she can take. She can take 8. Why is this a problem? I think it's a piece of cake. You don't worry about this that often. Even if you're doing like a difficulty 4 or 5 test for your very first action every turn, well, A, don't, but B, you can just spend 2 actions and get rid of this at some point. Gloria. Novel investigator. So she's just here. Her whole thing is that when she looks at encounter cards from the deck, she can discard them, but what she also can do is put 1 underneath her card. This thing, Liber Ominum Finium, something like that, just says you must draw 1 of those cards. Most people play a Gloria where you never put any cards underneath her card, and this just shuffles back in your deck. I don't know. This is like a speed bump. If you play that way, I think it's just poorly designed. Is it a piece of cake? Like, it's like not even I can't even evaluate it for the text on the card. You know, I'm going to say it's a piece of cake. I don't think it does much. It eats your draw, but even if you do put 1 card underneath you, like, who cares? But honestly, like getting attacked by an enemy or something is probably not worth it. On to some new investigators. We've got Alessandra with Zamacona. You cannot parlay with him. And if you're parlaying with anyone else, he gets a doom. Okay. I wonder where this guy goes. So he demands your attention, which basically puts him up here, right? All the other ones demand your attention. You need to put a backstab in your deck if you're going to deal with him yourself. There's a few other ways, but he's tough to kill otherwise. And the elusive thing makes him tough also. I don't know. I honestly, I've not seen a full campaign with this guy, so I don't have a good handle on where he goes. But at the moment, I'm going to put him up here. He does warp your conception of your deck enough where the other ones don't. And even when he comes out, it's not just a piece of cake like handcuffs would be. Kate. Kate is the very first investigator that has a skill test printed on her weakness. Wacky. Test 3 willpower. She only has 2. Is it 3 or 2? Hold up. 3. This test gets +1 difficulty for each asset you control with a clue on it, which is probably a few. For each point you fail by, you must either take a horror or place one of your clues on your location. So what you can do is you can spend your clues. You can see over there at the flux stabilizer. The other side of it lets you move clues from the assets back to Kate, I think, to get a +2. Something like that. Yeah. So that basically reduces the test difficulty and then gives you a bonus. So the way to fix this, to pass this test, is kind of built in. Autofail, though, would be bad. I don't think this is terrible. I think this is an average weakness. Okay, we've now loaded up on the average one, which is good. The funny thing is not doing this in actual order. It's hard to see if the duds were all at the beginning or at the middle or the end of the game's lifespan. Wendy, take 1 direct horror and goodbye to all of your cards in your discard pile. Sorry. 2 direct horror. 2 direct horror. I think this is game plan ruining. Yeah, you're gonna draw this at some point. If it's at the beginning of the scenario, then it doesn't matter. If it's in the middle, you're a little bit annoyed because if you're using the amulet, you're trying to use those cards. And if it's at the end, you could actually just lose. Yeah. I think it's very, very, very rough. Now, there are ways to play around it. If you're using the amulet, you are digging things out of your discard pile and putting them back into your deck. So that's kind of the solution. I think the 2 direct horror, though, is also very, very hard. Abandon and load, man. It's not mess around. There's also things people do with, I don't know. There was a thing with like Daredevil, maybe Friends in Low Places, to try to bait this out earlier or to get some infinite loop. I don't remember what it is, but there are some things people do, but that just goes to show you, in the normal case, it's so bad that people want to try to cheese it. Koaku. All right, this guy has the Weeping Yurei, who is an enemy that does 2 horror. It's aloof, so it does not bother you right away. Has elusive and hunter. So if you draw anyone, not just you, draw a Bless or Curse token at that location, you get attacked, he walks away. Question always everyone has is, if you're attacking him and then you draw Bless or Curse during that test, do you still deal damage? And the answer is yes. Even if he's at a different location, you still finish off the test. 2 health is not bad. Sneaky though, right? Since he affects everyone, and you're likely to have a lot of those tokens in the bag. So I think this is an average weakness as well. Hank, where's Pa? You discard cards from the top of the deck until you get an enemy. That enemy spawns at a connecting location, gains elusive. Gotta kill him before the end of the game, otherwise you get mental trauma. I've seen this in 2 campaigns now. I don't think it's a big deal. Hank wants to kill things. There's certainly the case where you pull something out that's difficult. Having an extra enemy on the board can be annoying, especially in lower player counts. But ultimately, I think this is a speed bump. We're going to see one more weakness that is very similar to it. Okay, come on. Okay. Wilson. I think you just get rid of Wilson's weakness. So you put hastier pairs into your threat area. Your base value is 0 for when you trigger any assets that you control. Basically, you can do nothing. 2 actions, get rid of it. Average. Yeah, here's Smite the Wicked. So Zoe has the same sort of thing as Hank. Discard cards on the top of the encounter deck until you get an enemy. This time it goes far away, very far away. On some maps, this is pretty bad. On other maps, it's nothing. Mental trauma is not to be trifled with. You really do want to just kill this thing. Where does this go? I don't think it's upsetting. You have to figure it out at some point, but I think it goes where Hanks did. I don't think it's super different. I think it's a little bit tougher just because you have to run after it. But on most scenarios, I think that's not a big deal. Rex. Rex's Curse. Rex's Curse is annoying for the player. So you put it into your threat area. When you would pass a skill test, you put the tokens back in the cup and then you draw again and see if you pass again. Some weird things here. You don't actually cancel that token. I think you just don't use its modifier. So if you draw something with like a cultist token that says, take a damage or something, you still do. Yeah. This only shuffles back into your deck. It doesn't go into your discard pile, so pretty annoying too. But it doesn't actually do anything. You can use your Elder Sign to try to fail it, but I don't think it it doesn't do anything, right? It just causes some mental anguish on you. I think this weakness, I mean, there's nothing you can do about it either, right? Other than the Elder Sign thing I was talking about. I think this is just a piece of cake because, you're just drawing again. Who's to say? You might actually succeed by 2 on the second draw when you only succeeded by 1 on the first. Jenny, searching for Izzy. This is fairly upsetting. This goes to the other end of the map. You need to spend 2 actions to do the investigation. Your skill value is pretty low, so you need to boost up with something. And if you fail, it really is bad. Oh no. This is fairly upsetting. It's not game plan ruining because you can take the mental trauma. It's fine. Someone else can do the test for you. Right? Yep. Okay, Jim. Jim likes skulls until he draws the final Rhapsody. Reveal 5 Chaos tokens for each skull or autofail, take a damage, and a horror. So on average, this is like what, 2 and 2? And then it's done. You don't even take any actions. It's just 8 a draw. So what do we have that's like this? I think it's kind of like the Burden of Destinies. So we're going to put it in average. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. Okay, the last one's here, and I need to move this over so you can see these. Hopefully you can still see things on the screen. These all have 3 signatures, so that's why the images are so big. Maybe we'll just make them a little smaller. Yeah. Okay, Siren Call for Silas. By the way, I'm not deliberately not doing the novel investigators, the replacement signatures, by the way. Nor am I doing the parallel. So parallel Ashcan Pete, sorry. Siren Call. Silas I also just played recently. And this is pretty bad. So for each matching skill icon, you must lose a resource. I always made the Carson on my team just get rid of it for me. It's an additional cost, so you have to do it. If you're playing Dark Horse, which I was, you just can't. Yep. Where's Vincent Lee in this? He doesn't have 3 signatures, does he? Oh yeah, he does. He has. Wait, does he? Well, we'll see. Um, I think this is actually pretty bad. It's way more than a speed bump. I think this is fairly upsetting. So why is this worse than, say, Ashcan Pete's? Mm, it's probably very similar. The reason why I think it's worse is Ashcan Pete generally isn't in charge of evading or fighting a bunch of enemies. He might be, but well, I don't know. Rack by Nightmares is pretty bad, right? Because then you don't even ready the assets. Once you get rid of Siren's Call, you're good to go. Hmm. I admit ignorance here because this one is one I've always outsourced. Um, I mean, that should say something, though. I think for Racked by Nightmares, you don't need to use Duke. I mean, you'd like to, but you don't need to. I might even upgrade Racked by Nightmares to barely upsetting. That's where I'm at. I think those are tough. Okay, let's go to the next one. Mark Harrigan. Well, he's got Sophie, which the other side of her is kind of a weakness, but not really. I mean, it kind of is. I'm only gonna okay. I'm only gonna rate it on Shell Shock though, because that one is the one that you probably will drop. For each for every 2 damage on you, take 1 horror. You might have 2 damage on you. You should not have 4 damage on you. If you are doing that, something has already gone very wrong. You should be healing all of your damage all the time. That's how Mark works. There's no way you should have 5 damage on you or 6. Like, you've already basically lost at that point. If you just so happen to pick up Shell Shock when that's happening, okay, you're done. Most of the time you draw this and it whiffs. It's bizarre. It doesn't say shuffle back into your deck if this dealt you no horror. It's a piece of cake. You might take 1 horror. Oh no. Finn has caught red-handed. Do I go on a tirade about caught red-handed at this point? There's this bizarre ruling out there these days that says that this card does nothing. What it actually says is, I need to read this out loud, um, otherwise I'll get this wrong. Ready each enemy at your location or a connecting location. Each hunter enemy at a connecting location moves 1 location toward you. If no enemies move as a result of this effect, shuffle caught red-handed back into your deck. Okay. The way that I have always played this and always understood it, because it makes sense in the context of Arkham Horror, the card game, is you pick all the enemies at your location and all of the connecting location. Ready each enemy at your location or connecting location. If they're at your location or a connecting location, they ready. That is the way that I've read this card. It doesn't say and. The reason why is the templating in this game usually does and if something can be at both one location and another, which is basically impossible. So that's why it says or. But in plain English, or here is totally fine for it to be either one, not choose a location. But that is exactly how they've ruled this. They've ruled it as you choose a location, your location or a connecting location. Ready each enemy at that location. Then each enemy at a connecting location moves 1 location toward you. So if there are no enemies at your location, you can just say pass. I will choose my location. Now, regardless of all the nonsense of this ruling. Oh, by the way, each hunter enemy at a connecting location moves 1 location toward you, right? This is even more evidence that it should be ready, all of them. You still would move like the exhausted hunter enemy towards you, I suppose, because it doesn't say to choose at that point. But then it's exhausted at your location. Like, why is that a problem? I'll get off my soapbox. One way or another, this card is awful. But you kind of want to make this happen. Otherwise, it's shuffling back into your deck all the time. So it's weird, though, to me that you can ready enemies, but if you don't actually move any hunters, then it shuffles back no matter what. So maybe that's why they wanted that ruling to make it a little easier. But I think that shuffling cards back in your deck is just a rough thing, no matter what. And I don't like that ruling. I need to put this on the tier list, though. I think this is fairly upsetting. I do not like it, no matter how you rule it. Diana, here's the other half of the deny existence ruling story. Another one of these choices. So for each card beneath her, and she likes to put cards that she cancels underneath her, either take a horror or you discard the card. Discarding the card is also bad because it bumps your willpower down. Well, this is an okay card. I think it's maybe not quite as bad as Sister Mary's because we're only going to be taking up to 5 horror, or you just get rid of the cards, which isn't great, but you should be able to like shuffle more cards into your basement. It's not like the curses that go in are then going to be a problem too. That's what I think makes Crisis of Faith very difficult, is because that you're no longer just done with the Blessed token. You don't just remove it from the bag, it becomes a curse. So I think this is going to go under average. I can see it going higher for some other people. Vincent Lee. Right. He's got 2 signatures. The On the Mend is one of them. Wounded Bystander, though, you have to heal all the damage before it gets all the damage. So it starts with some, and then you just either heal it off or it gets removed from the game. It's funny, though. Some people play this a little bit like a meat shield, just because you can put damage on it. And it doesn't... You actually don't need to heal all the damage off of it. It just will stay in play. I think it's actually pretty manageable. I think you can kind of game it. Let's put it under speed bump. 2 left. Amina. Amina is the exact same thing as Agnes, Dark Memory, except you don't pay the action or the 2 resources. So it's an Ancient Evils in your deck. If you don't have any Doom on your assets, which is strange because you're playing Amina, then it shuffles back in. So it does eat up your draw again if you happen to draw it before you have Doom out there. Or after you've gotten rid of the Doom. I mean, that's a thing you do too. I think it's a bit too rough for Amina. For her power level, right? So I said before that Agnes, you can accept the Ancient Evils in your deck because Agnes is quite good. Amina is fine. I don't think she's quite good. So I'm going to put this one... I think it goes in the same place. I don't think it's as bad as maybe those top 3 that I have here. I think it's just pretty upsetting to draw. All right, one more thing, and that's Tony Morgan. Tony Morgan also has Doom, so this is kind of on his weakness. Tony's Quarry. It's an enemy. It spawns at a location very far away, so kind of like the Zoe weakness, kind of like the Jenny weakness. Comes in with a bounty, right? So this gives you the extra action to engage it, which you might need to do since it's aloof. It also gives you money back for killing it. It also comes in with a Doom. So if it's really far away and you can't get to it right away, then it is kind of an Ancient Evils, which is okay in the rogue class. Tony is really, really good. Does he care about having an Ancient Evils? And then if you just don't, if you let it be an Ancient Evils, you've lost nothing. You just let it sit there forever. Compare that to Agnes, right? Agnes forces you to pay for the Ancient Evils. Amina, I guess, is very similar because you just don't do anything, but it can shuffle back in, which is a draw, and I don't think she's strong enough to get anything out of it. Whereas for Tony, it could be you can get a lot out of this, right? You can get a resource, you can get it's just telling you to use your ability right away. I think it's average. I don't actually want to put it at the bottom. Like I think some people think that this is a pretty easy one, but the truth is you do sometimes need to go out of your way to deal with it. For fight, not a big deal for Tony, but if you do fail or you need, extra action or something, not that you should need it, but two horror is also kind of tough. I don't know. I mean, truly, the average ones are not that bad. If I were ranking these in order, and I'm not, it's probably towards the bottom. But I do think it's worse than these other ones that don't ask much of you. If I had another tier, which I don't, it probably lives somewhere near the Zoe and Hank ones, just because they spawn extra enemies as well. Um, man, I don't know. The Doom part throws me off. Sometimes it could do nothing. It could come up in the witching hour and you never deal with it. The thing about that one compared to, say, Hank's or Zoe's is that those could be pretty unpredictable and you have to go after it. And I rated those as pretty easy. And now I'm doubting myself on that. I think it's the Doom part that puts me over. And it's very possible that Hank and Zoe's just spawn a really dumb enemy. But no one else other than Tony wants to fight the quarry. Whereas someone could easily kill the weaknesses for Zoe or Hank. Yeah, I feel okay about this. That's the last one, by the way. That's all 59. A lot of investigators. So here's the whole thing. We've got 3 game plan ruiners, and I probably thought going in that there would be more. I do feel like there's some pretty tough ones in the fairly upsetting. Let's get rid of the slideshow so you can see everything. Cover up. I think it's just easier to deal with these days. I've played a number of campaigns with Roland. It's annoying because you're using up a lot of your resources for it. In one player, it's much worse, right? Because it's the number of cards that you use or actions used to get rid of it is just a lot worse. So am I rating this whole list for 2-player, 3-player, 4-player, solo? Most of my experience is 2 and 3, so it's sitting in there somewhere. Anything else jump out at me? I'm thinking about the Tony one a lot more. It demands a little bit more of your attention than the others. I'm also a little bit concerned about the Racked by Nightmares. Let me know what you think about Ashcan Pete's weakness. I do think it's tough, but is it different than, say, Siren's Call? Or are they more similar than I'm willing to admit at the moment? I mean, it's good to talk these things out. Good to have a little bit of self-doubt. Tier lists are just silly anyway. Don't take anything so seriously here. The rest of them, I think, seem about right to me. We did end up having, I think, a little bit more of a skew towards the lower end. So average is probably not average anymore, but that's okay. It is a little sad that some of the very strong investigators have weaknesses that just do nothing. But it's all part of the balance, I think. And sometimes they miss they miss the correct balance, and maybe they thought some of these would be harder. I think Amanda's in particular, it reads much worse than it actually plays. So something might have happened there in playtesting that I'm not so sure of. Cool. All right. Well, if you'd like to see more of these things, of course, let me know. Always welcome to do more of these kinds of silly tier lists. And then, if you have some different ideas, some experiences that are quite different than mine on these cards, let me know about them in the comments below. It's always going to be based on your own play styles and your own experiences. But I'll just repeat now that I don't rate these based on the absolute worst case or the absolute best case of how to deal with them. It's the typical ones, the things that happen more often than not. And to me, these ones in the top are going to cause you more grief. God forbid if you draw the auto fail on King in yellow. Ugh. All right, I'll see you later. Thanks for watching.